This week, not quite a normal sermon, not something I would preach if I was standing in a pulpit, and so I'm winging it without a script. I very deliberately kept it casual without the cassock and tabs, and I want to try out on you a train of thought that has been a help to me in recent years and certainly in recent weeks, and it might just be helpful to you. It probably involves me saying things some ministers wouldn't say, which is why this is a non-sermon. And if you think it is shocking rubbish, then please just ignore it. And next week I'll try to be a bit more minister-like and conventional. I want to say something about one kind of prayer, the kind that we call intercession. And it's the kind of prayer that lots of people find a bit tricky. The problem most people have with intercessory prayer, that's the kind of prayer where you pray for other people and for what you think they need, is that they are not sure how that works with God. A lot of people worry about what God is expected to do when we pray for someone else. Is God expected to behave in a way that has been determined by the fact that we prayed? What does that say about God's freedom? Or is God expected to do something that runs counter to the laws of nature, reversing the course of an illness that was quite naturally taking its course? Might be a very current example. That has got all sorts of theological difficulty behind it, and all sorts of books have been written. My difficulty, I have to confess, comes a little bit earlier than that, in the kind of logic of how prayer works between a person and God. And I think the problem is best illustrated by just looking at that word intercession. And the inter bit at the beginning of it tells you that there is some element of being between something and something else when you are praying in this way. And most people, most of the time, assume that the person doing the praying is between God and the person they're praying for. In a very loving, very well-intentioned way, the person making the prayers is stepping into some kind of space where there is a need and speaking for that need to God. Now, I have a couple of problems with that, and I always have had. One is, what makes you think there is ever any space between God and anyone for whom you are praying? Space enough to slip yourself or your prayers into it? And so is it really the best picture of a loving God, or is it one that just seems to make God more distant, more far away, more remote than we should be thinking at all? The next difficulty is more of a psychological one. Where exactly is this person who's doing this praying? If I am in between you when I'm praying for you and God, am I facing towards God, in which case I've got my back to you? Or am I facing towards you, in which case presumably I have got my back to God? And either way, does it not leave me kind of guessing what it is you need or want to say to God, or what it is you might be hoping to hear in that place of prayer where we are supposed to listen as much as talk? And throughout my life, throughout my adult life, I have found that exercise of intercession going a bit wrong, because it's in the hands of frail and faltering human beings who are really good at making a mess of the things that God gives us to do. And where people intercede for other people, the temptation to start figuring out what is best for that other person, deciding what needs to be prayed for, deciding what needs to be conveyed to that person from God, can be a bit of a slippery slope. As a student, first time round, I had friends who were in Christian groups which had a different tradition of faith from the one I'd been brought up in. And I found sometimes that I was being prayed for because the people praying for me somehow didn't quite approve all of my doctrinal beliefs and positions. And I was kind of once bitten, twice shy about personal intercession after that. Throughout my ministry, those of you whose minister I have been may have noticed, I have never once set up in any congregation a small prayer group, because I've seen one or two of them go so far wrong, especially if led by quite strong, powerful, dominant personalities, that sometimes harm can be done, and I've always just been too nervous to risk it. And in that, I think I am confessing something that most ministers would be rather shocked by, and that's why I'm not doing this in a pulpit or wearing a cassock. I'm being fairly brutally honest here. But last week on Twitter, a friend of mine, a minister, asked for the prayers of his friends because he admitted he was struggling a bit with this lockdown stuff. He'd had to do umpteen funerals and was finding it a bit much. He was finding that he was feeling a bit stressed out in his home life. And as I do every day for different people, I prayed for him. I interceded. And I used a technique of intercession that I stumbled upon, I think just in the course of my prayers 2 or 3 years ago. One that I use when somebody is needing me to pray for them particularly and deeply. And I want to describe that to you because it does seem to me to overcome the problems with that traditional picture of go-between intercession that I was struggling with earlier in this talk. Here's what I do. If I want to pray for somebody at length and deeply, in my mind's eye, I stand very close behind their shoulder, possibly even with my hands on either side of their upper arms, so that in my imagination I am reassuring them that I am here and I am loving them and I am praying for them. I look over their shoulder in the same direction that they are, and I try so far as I possibly can to see what they must be seeing, to look at the landscape that is in front of them, to be conscious of whatever the thing is in that view that caused me to want to pray for them in the first place. And that has probably been some stress, some grief, some break of the heart, some worry, some expectation they can't meet, something that caused them to reach out to me or caused me just to know that I needed to pray for that person. I'm standing behind them, and it seems to me that does two things. Firstly, it gives me the best possible chance of understanding properly what it is they need and want to say to God, and gives me the best possible chance of sharing their listening to see what wisdom, what promise, what word of divine love may be coming back to them. And if by hearing that I'm hearing something they're not in a place to hear right now, then maybe I can offer my practical support and love to them in a way that has been deeply informed by that, and therefore I am less likely to make a mess of my care for them. And the second thing I'm doing, well, actually it's something I'm not doing. I'm not getting in the way. I'm not stepping on that ground between them and the divine they are reaching towards. I am not obstructing their view, their earshot. Now, I said this wasn't a sermon, but I cannot resist hooking what I've just been saying onto the gospel lesson that we just heard read. It's the one about the sheep making their way to the safety of the fold, with Christ himself as the way in and out, the point of safe transit, the reassurance of the security of that place within that belonging and that company of his. It just seems to me that the sheep, if that picture is going to work, the sheep need to be able to see that trusted figure, to make their way unencumbered towards that pen. Somebody standing in the ground between the flock and the pen, between the flock and the shepherd, shouting the odds at the shepherd or trying to give instructions to the sheep, is just going to achieve nothing at all. In our prayers, we are doing something dangerous. We know that's true because everything we do in Christian life is a bit dangerous. But in our prayers, we are in danger not of harm, but of doing harm. I said at the beginning, you might not agree with what I've said in this. You might just think it's a very strange thing for a minister to be fessing up on a Sunday morning. But if that change of picture, that turnaround in that metaphor of prayer opens up to you afresh the possibility of interceding for those you love in a way that is healthy, in a way that is open-hearted, in a way that works for you, then my brutal honesty about my own struggle may do some good, and so I offer it to you with my love.